morning, everybody. Hope you're all getting set for the holidays coming up soon. Only a couple of weeks to go. I tell you what, I cannot wait to have a little bit of a break from what has been quite probably an insane year. But look, for today, we've got an absolute fabulous guest with us and a legend in his own right. John Wilkins is the current global global managing director of the Creative Council at Accenture Interactive. Prior to this, he was also the chairman of Karmarama, and he brings an extensive experience of leading and building teams. But look, today is all about getting to know the man behind the scenes, what makes him tick, and how he was able to foster an amazing career and really become a global leader in his own right. So John, it's with absolute pleasure that I welcome you to the show this morning. It's super to have you on with us.
Many thanks. It's absolutely wonderful and an honor to be here. So thank you.
Absolute pleasure. Well, Mark, over to you for the first question of the day.
Thanks, Richie. Hi, John. Fabulous to have you on. Let's get going with the obvious question. How has 2020 been for you, John?
It's been a year of ups and downs, I think, for everybody. I mean, it's been a time where, you've certainly connected with things, deep feelings that you possibly haven't connected with for a long time, thinking about mortality and hope and the future. But, the positive would be there's obviously been a lot of time for reflection and a lot of time for thinking about what's important. So, out of every pig of a year comes a little bit of a silver lining, I guess.
And so, John, tell us, you're clearly in a global role, managing a range of different agencies as part of your role at Accenture. I mean, how has that been for you? How has that changed? How has that evolved and adapted over the last couple of months?
Well, I guess the wonders of devices like Zoom and Teams have kept us all connected. But I mean, definitely missing, travel. I think travel is a hugely underrated commodity, and doing everything digitally has not been as much fun. And so actually I was thinking about talking to some learned friends about travel, and I think travel, because it takes you out of your comfort zone literally, it just forces you to reframe everything from the roads, the people, the culture, the food, and I think it's very good for the soul. So even though I've kept in touch with all my colleagues through Australian Zooms in the morning through to American and Brazilian Zooms at night, I've definitely missed the experience of actually hanging with them, Yeah.
Yeah, I've only been into the office a couple of times, but It's always felt indulgent to commute, whereas I used to absolutely bloody hate it. But so, it's, as you say, sort of getting out of this rectangular world that we are occupying.
Mm.
But I mean, you talked about Zooms with Australia and so on. I mean, I think it's become a relentless period of time.
Yeah.
And particularly, I guess, if you're in a global role. So just how have you sort of managed to keep any sense of balance through this period?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I think there's two sides to the balance. Obviously, your home and personal life. Like today, I had a shower, took my pajamas. Sorry, wrong way round. I didn't have a shower with my pajamas on. I took my pajamas, had a shower, and then I'm staring at you, Mark, which is unusual, as a sequence of events. But I think there's a little bit around, for me, thinking time is a very important part of my job. And what I've noticed, and I think this is probably true of a lot of people, that the ability to digitally connect means in some ways we're literally filling our days with digital meetings. And I've found that disappointing and really hard. And I've realized how much that thinking time, the gaps in between, is where sort of ideas develop, where spontaneity happens. So that would be obviously one observation. And then the second one, you're absolutely right, is where do you stop and start? I mean, I've sort of tried my hardest to balance, but it has been very hard. I mean, the only thing I've discovered, which I never did, but I'm really excited about, is the afternoon nap. If I've got a little gap between 2 and 3, I quite often now just put my head down for 40 minutes, set the alarm, and it's an incredibly refreshing moment where you just get a quick bit of respite. But it is hard. It's definitely hard.
John, that sounds very much like a confession more than anything else. That's
I'm happy with that. Yeah.
Well, you're synonymous with creativity, and one specific question I had is that typically creatives work as pairs.
Sure.
And sort of share each other's lives. They're very, very often very close.
Yeah. Yeah.
And something is lost in this digital interaction, some of the magic. So have you found that creative pairs have struggled more than others as a result?
That was our original hypothesis, was that was going to be the case. And probably, we monitor and review how everybody's getting on just generally all the way through this. And actually, the creatives are also generally like their own space and time, and it's it's a pursuit where your own company is actually really good for the development of ideas. So actually, bizarrely, the creatives have found this fine, and actually sitting in an office with a lot of disruptions and people tapping on the shoulders actually stops your flow. One thing we thought in an agency structure that was going to be fine, which hasn't been, is, just that regular dialogue with people like you, Mark. Client interaction, even though you can do it like this, we spend a lot of time literally rubbing shoulders with our clients, and you sort of build your capital through the relationships you develop. And that is much harder, actually, not because you're jollying or doing, but it's just much harder sometimes talking to a client team of 10 people where 4 cameras are on, 6 are off. You're trying to judge the mood. Normally if we were in a room with a client, if somebody's not with you, you can see they're not with you, and you can bring them into the conversation. So we've actually found managing clients' well-being and is harder than actually developing the creative, if that makes sense.
Let's take a step back there, John, for a second, and perhaps you can tell us a little bit about your career and how you can join the dots as to how you were able to achieve what you have to this point.
Yeah, I don't see, my life as an achievement. I see it as an ongoing journey, but I guess I've always wanted to explore sort of new things, and my love of sort of communication probably started at a very young age. When I think about it, I've always been interested in music and culture, and sort of just how people engage with stuff. I did a degree in social science. I decided I wanted to become a researcher in TV shows. That was my original dream. And so I applied for many jobs, got turned down by most of them. But I finally got a job at Granada TV as a program researcher. And in that department of research, there was program researchers and also marketing researchers. And I actually liked the fun of the marketing side more than the programming side. So I ended up drifting that way. And then from there went to MTV Europe when it first launched, which is amazing. The launch of the pop video, that ages me significantly, but that was in marketing and research, and then moved to Disney in marketing. And so sort of went quite a long way in content and media marketing. And then I had a moment where I got a call saying, do you want to go into advertising? And I didn't, we had agencies at Disney, but I didn't know too much about it. But I was kind of intrigued, and I went for an interview at an agency called BMP DDB, who are now called Adam and Eve. And it was just a bit of a moment, really. It was full of sort of madcap geniuses and very strange and wonderful environment, one that Dr. Zeus would have definitely approved of. And I just thought, crikey, I feel at home. I can be myself. And that was something that I probably hadn't been able to do. And then from then on, really just tracked my way through advertising, got really interested in all the changes in the media landscape, particularly around the sort of mid-90s when the internet first started blossoming. We set up what is now Tribal DDB out of BMP at the time in 1993, doing interactive TV trials in car parks in Cambridge and stuff like that. And I just got really interested in media, and I was very lucky to get a job as a PhD, who were quite an enterprising creative media company, and I became MD there. And then there I got the entrepreneurial bug. So that was a bit of a turning point for me. I think it was at a time when .com, I remember somebody coming in saying, I've got this amazing product, we're selling shoes online. And on paper, this kid was like, I don't know, a multi-millionaire. And I thought, oh my goodness, how can you sell shoes online? That's really, really strange. And at the time, I just thought, crikey, if he can do it, anyone can do it, and that was a liberating moment and the sort of start of Naked, which was a beautiful journey for me and friends and a band of us. And, that took me all the way through to 13 as an entrepreneur, which I didn't think I was ever going to do. And sold that business, joined Karma Armour, went on the same journey again, leading to another entrepreneurial journey, and then into a huge company where I am now, which is Accenture. So yeah, I've enjoyed it, and it's just sort of the twists and turns along the way, I guess. Sort of it's connected for me just about.
What a full and rich career, and it actually sounds like you've had a lot of fun. I'm wondering actually, when I was at 118, whether we probably almost to that point. Yeah. Right. So
incredible, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what great times. At the very beginning of that, you said you talked about being exploratory.
Yeah.
So these things tend to get wired in quite young. Can you have you got any sort of childhood memories or anything which you think sort of led to that exploratory nature?
I think so, yeah. I remember certainly in sort of art, culture and music, which are sort of adjacent creative industries. I remember my dad is an artist, designer and a jazz musician. So I always had that influence of just things that I didn't quite understand around me. And I think I always wanted to just sort of keep learning. And I joined this thing at my grammar school. I went to a grammar school in High Wycombe, which was called Vulture. And Vulture was a group of people that just literally did abnormal cultural stuff. I was probably about 12 or 13, so you'd go to theatre, you go to mime, you go to classical music, you go to a rock concert, but it was just always about sort of opening your mind to new stuff. And I think the moral of the story for me has been, you can be good at your job, but if you're not open to new stuff, particularly probably with the pace of, I don't want to talk all the cliches, but things are moving quite quickly at the moment, very dangerous and worried about being cliched. I think if you're not open to the new stuff, you kind of get displaced a bit along the way, and that's when you get into a rut. So I've always found, obsessed with new things you don't understand as a sort of motto for life, has sort of been really good for me. It's kept me on my toes, and it means that even though I'm a 50-something, grey, whatever, old man now, I sort of feel young in my soul and spirit, if that makes sense.
It certainly does, John. And so what I find fascinating about your career is that sometimes, you were a complete corporate, working for one of the largest organizations in the world today, but yet have gone on a number of entrepreneurial journeys too.
Sure.
And quite often people tend to pigeonhole people into being an entrepreneur or being a corporate guy. And clearly that's not been the case. So how do you view those sides of the coin and being able to transition from an entrepreneurial way of life into perhaps a structured way of life? How do you navigate that?
It's a great question, Richie, because I've thought about this a lot, and I think I like being at the sort of apex of change, particularly in marketing services. The thing that's excited me the most has been the changing dynamics in the industry. And, I'm unashamedly a little bit of a rabble rouser. I like being on the edge of change and trying to drive that change rather than sitting in the middle and feeding off it, if that makes sense. And I think when I look at my career, every opportunity that I've grabbed has been, well, bar maybe one, but including the Accenture opportunity, has been to drive change. And I think another real motivating thing for me is when I sort of see things not working very well. This is an entrepreneur mindset in a way, but when I see things not working very well, I'd sort of rather be a sort of pioneer at the front of making it better, even knowing you often stumble and fail. And actually the journey within Interactive, entering marketing services in itself is a very bold move. And I think the reason I can connect with that journey, even though it's in a huge company, is we're once again trying to change an industry, hopefully for the better. And it feels entrepreneurial and challenging, even though it's in a huge enterprise. So that would be my common thread there, mate, if that makes sense.
You often say that Accenture Interactive is the world's biggest, most best funded startup.
Yeah, well, I think entering a new space. I think when Karmarama, when we were sort of the year or 2 years before we joined Accenture Interactive, we noticed that a lot of our clients were partnering us up with consultancy services, particularly in the digital space, and we work with IBM and Deloitte, and we could see what they were really good at, and we could also see the skills they were missing around sort of thinking about customers and proposition and purpose and brand. And it was sort of, even though it's sort of, in those days, it was a little bit of a clunky alliance. We could see that if you could combine business acumen with, technology and creative thinking, there was potentially another journey. And that was what excited us at Karma Armour. And I think with interactive, that's my Ocado shop, by the way, buzzing as we speak. But with interactive, what we've tried to do really is to sort of bring those skills together to sort of say, well, actually, could we reimagine what an experience could look and feel like for a customer? And I think that's really, really exciting. So, I think, what we've done is we've built a sort of dream, if you like, which is, and the dream is based on a fundamental human truth, which is consumers don't like the edifice of brands and the reality of poor service. There's a huge disconnect. And I've been obsessing about that way before Accenture, going, well, how do we join the dots? In fact, Naked was really about trying to connect experience, but in a communication way, and trying to bring it all together where you can sit with clients and sort of try and break down the silos and join things up has been an incredibly complex but really interesting journey. And again, I think on message for the future of our industry, I think. So
John, Sorry, there's a beautiful e-commerce arc to this conversation, talking about somebody selling shoes online and then the Ocado delivery arrives.
Yeah, I know.
You could probably say, or it'd be safe to say, you're sort of at the extreme end in terms of having a growth mindset, fixed mindsets, growth mindsets. And so you pivoted and had a lot of success. But I'm sure it hasn't always been perfect. Often it's the case that very, very successful people have had their highs and lows. So it may be helpful just to hear some of the times that haven't been so brilliant and how you've learned, adapted and pivoted.
Well, I think like one when I was at MTV, I got offered a job at Disney, and I was working for an American guy at MTV, and he said, "John, I know you really well, and I know what you're into, and I'm telling you, you won't like the culture at Disney." So there's nothing wrong with Disney, just to raise my hand, a fantastic company. But I remember joining Disney and 2 weeks in thinking, "Oh my goodness, I'm in the wrong place." And it was literally 2 weeks in, and I didn't know what to do. I was really young. I was like panicking that I'd made a really bad call. I almost wanted to run back to MTV and see if they'd take me. I mean, I persevered and I learned a lot, but first lesson, negative lesson, would be the culture of the environment. And I've always kept that in my pocket. Whenever I've occasionally gone for interviews, I sit in reception and watch the vibe and the culture and the people and really study the culture of companies to see if I can swim or whether I'm going to sink in it. So that would be one. Second one would probably be, honestly, starting your own company is a devastatingly negative and euphoric experience at the same time. So, an average week at Naked, you would, because you take failure so personally, you would literally be, I would be ecstatic if we won something or produced something brilliant, literally broken to my knees. And I wasn't ready for that, the swings of highs and lows of entrepreneurialism. I got used to it, but that was a real journey. And then the last one, sadly, is my founding partner at Naked, John Harlow, passed away in 2013, and he was way too young. He was 43 years old, and it absolutely broke me. I mean, it was one of the reasons I left. It was like, the guy who you set a company up with dies, and it just doesn't make sense anymore. And I think that whole mortality thing, swings all the way into this COVID world, which is just being conscious of what you really care about, what you really stand for, what you really believe in. And, I'm sure coming out of COVID, many, many more people, I think, will have grounded themselves in what's important to them, both personally and professionally. So I don't know whether that's a few negatives.
Yeah, thanks for your candor. I mean, you've covered a broad range of things there, but I think all be very, very relatable. One more follow-up. You mentioned that moment of panic.
Yeah,
we've all faced that where we think we've made a mistake. Looking back, how do you think you sort of processed and dealt with that moment? And
I think I thought, there was somebody on my shoulder saying, "You've made a mistake, but give it a really good go because you're going to learn something," which I think was remarkably mature considering how reckless I was at that age. I was in other aspects of my life, I would have just walked out. But I stuck with it, and I sort of in my head thought 16, 18 months, I'll learn a lot. And I did, but it felt like going back to university and studying a subject I didn't want to study, if you know what I mean. I think the only other way I've thought about this a lot. If I'd been the older version of me in that point of view, I literally might have rung my old boss back up 2 weeks in and gone, look, I've really messed up. I think either getting out very quickly or treating it as a sort of entrenched study period of a lesson in life. I think doing something in the middle and just whinging and moaning and getting really unhappy would have been the wrong thing. But I could have probably flipped out straight away, to be honest. Yeah.
That's a lovely thought. The thought of, act quickly or learn a lesson. I think that's a good sort of thought for people in similar shoes. First of all, I want to my condolences to obviously that very tough moment in time for you, and thank you for sharing that. I know that's maybe not easy about your partner, so that's thank you for that. You talk about the entrepreneurial journey being this constant sort of swinging up and down. Over time, I mean, I'd love to hear about some of the ways that you were able to cope with that sort of that roller coaster journey, and I'm sure people listening in may well be going through a similar sort of journey in different aspects of their lives. How do you cope with that sort of constant roller coaster that you may be on? And then just as a follow-up to that does over time, because you have to have those coping mechanisms, do the highs never get that high anymore when you say win a massive account, and do the lows kind of almost kind of not get that deep because it's a coping mechanism?
Sure. I mean, brilliant questions again. I mean, I think when we started, there was literally just three men on a boat on the Thames so I think, your stability isn't there. You don't have the resources, you don't have the team below you. So you feel literally every bump in the road, and it's incredibly personal. I think we were lucky with Naked that the company grew. We got to hire some brilliant people. We got to open in 16 different geographies around the world. And what that meant was we got this underpinning and stability. So if you imagine it being a little boat on the ocean, it started like this. We were just getting tossed around in the waves. And then generally we became a little bit more like a liner where, you can manage the ups and downs a lot better. So I think, that worked. I think the highs, that's a really good point. I mean, I think the highs, I would say I still love the highs of our industry, and there's moments which are just, that feeling doesn't go away, but I've got much better at managing the lows. So I think in truth, in life, what I've come to the conclusion is you can't control everything, so that comes a little bit with maturity. So I've probably got better at dealing with the lows, but the highs still feel incredibly special. And I think for your own psychology and mental wellness, you kind of can't take everything so intensely personally, because it just constantly torturing your soul because something gone wrong isn't really a healthy way to lead your life. So I'd say the highs are still there. The lows I've got better at managing, really.
I love that thought that so we all have an imposter syndrome, but to offer the lows, but still really realize the highs. What a great balance if you can achieve it. Changing tack slightly, you've talked quite openly about the balance, or maybe the lack of balance, between science and art in creativity within marketing. So in this world of programmatic and AI and all blah blah blah, which I suppose you'd be interested in because it's new technology. What is the balance there?
I just think generally things are out of balance. I mean, you're way more expert, you two, in this than I am. But I think what sort of broadly happened was the creative community, in my humble opinion, didn't modernize quick enough. They sat a little bit on a pedestal, whilst at the same time there was a huge growth in direct ways of talking to a customer that were highly accountable. And I think, we have leading lights in the creative industries that do sing from the rooftops about the effectiveness of brand building and long-term creativity. But I feel we got out-shouted by, people that were far more numeric at precisely a time where marketing in a positive way was trying to elevate to the top table and really prove its worth. We couldn't, as a creative community, provide the tangible proof that would get the CMO elevated to a CEO of a company. And Google and the likes could provide that data point. And as a result, I think we've gone out of equilibrium, if I'm honest. I think we've gone too far the other way, and that is really problematic for brands, and both in terms of brand building, but also service design. I feel like things have sort of commoditized a lot, and when customers can't see the difference between products and services, your category just commoditizes and drops. So one of the reasons I'm so excited to, a lot of people within Accenture are very, very, very left brain. They're very analytical, very rigorous, all the AI models, very involved with the platforms. And what I've been trying to do, and it's my personal crusade, but also many of us in the creative community, is to ensure that technology and that knowledge is used for good and can elevate creativity to the next level rather than sort of be a natural suppressant. Do you know what I mean? And so, I think the future has to recalibrate. Things have to even out. Otherwise, I just think, Amazon will win. White label products will rule the roost, and suddenly marketing and creativity will go into a tailspin that it can't recover from. So I think creativity, insight, platforming brands, behaving with purpose, telling beautiful narratives through all the channels available to us. That's why people affiliate with brands. We know that. So that moment has to come in the digital age, and it hasn't come yet, in my humble opinion. So I don't know whether that answers your question. I mean, I feel bad because you know a lot more about this than I do, but that would be my creative lens on it, in that we need a new rebirth of creativity fully embedded and fledged in the digital environment that we operate in.
So John, I love that answer, by the way, and I think it's absolutely bang on to the truth of where things need to move to. We have a question from the audience that I'd like to pitch on, which is sort of a bit of a follow-on, and looking into a bit of that sort of crystal ball, but talk specifically about, say, some of the media choices in marketing. So what do you think will be some of the next big things in relation to media marketing, or maybe media platforms?
I think, well, the one thing, and again, this is, aimed at sort of students predominantly, so I don't really want to get too technical, but one thing that's been very interesting has been brands needing platforms where they can talk more openly and widely with the community of people who they serve. And I think we've talked for a while about the growth of owned media, but in the past, owned media was kind of a website where you could transact predominantly with a product or a service. I think there will be a big growth in that platform between your brand and your product, becoming a much more connected, advisory, entertaining, useful experience. There'll be other bits. And, in the past, I remember talking to packaged goods or, fizzy pop through to chocolate, and they'd say, no, we'll never have that experience in the middle. I mean, in finance, I think that you guys have always tried to provide advisory stuff in the middle, but I actually think that's not true. I think almost any category can provide something that sits between their brand and the product delivery that can assist or inspire or support the customer. But I don't think it's yet articulated enough. So I think that kind of owned media space will go from being sort of a necessary evil in an e-commerce funnel to being a fully fledged, exciting, creative, informative environment that will actually elevate brands a lot more. That's what I think.
Yeah. You mentioned a genuine risk of losing creativity.
Yeah.
That does definitely strike a chord. But you also talked about the possibility of creating beautiful narratives. That was a lovely expression in and of itself. Who do you think's managed to succeed in doing that in the last couple of years, maybe?
I mean, in terms of brands, I think there's loads of people who've succeeded, but probably sporadically, not consistently. So I'm a studier of the work in the world, and I spent hours going through the sort of Can Lion archive. I'm probably a bit of a train spotter as well, which is another confession. And, you know, there are pockets of brilliance everywhere. I mean, you know, almost the list of brands is too long, but there isn't a consistent, successful model. Whereas I think if you look at the history of creativity, you know, initially print and the art of writing and copy in the sort of 40s and 50s became, you know, an exponential, brilliant platform for brands. And then TV became this brilliant platform for brands where, you know, an era. I just think at the moment, this new era of storytelling in the digital environment is still a little bit unclear. And I think as long as creativity and technology can now fuse, ideally around sort of, you know, something quite purposeful and meaningful for the customer, I think we haven't yet seen what that next wave of the creative evolution would be. I'm not dodging your question because I just don't want to get into sort of cliche case studies. I mean, one that, not trying to plug us, but one I absolutely love that we are, one of my agencies in Denmark won the Grand Prix at the Eurofest this week, and which is the Cannes of Europe, and it was for IKEA. And it was a beautiful campaign called IKEA Resale. And what they did was they took a number of things. They took the purpose of IKEA, which is to democratize furniture and to make sure everybody in the world can have affordable, high quality furniture, with an environmental crisis of, you know, stuff on scrap heaps. And they said, look, you know, let's create a platform for our customers to sell on their products from their homes to other people. We will give them, you know, some financial commitment to buy into new products within IKEA, but we'll create a new platform, which is called the IKEA Resale. So we did that initially in Denmark. It was on track with IKEA's mission and brand. It had a strong creative element. It had a technology platform in the middle, and it was hugely successful. And the sign of a successful campaign to me nowadays is when other countries just pick it up and plug it in. So we did it initially in their homeland, or well, it was actually Denmark. They were based in Malmo, but you know, very close across the bridge. And then now it's been rolled out into 30 countries. And I love that because, and I'm saying that rather than the Nikes and the thing, Legos and stuff that everybody talks about, just because it's personal to me. And because I think it's a sort of little glimpse of what the future can hold for great marketing, you know, and creativity.
You know, John, you've given us so many nuggets of what the hint to the future could look like. And by the way, you've totally opened my mind when it comes to the trends around D2C and how actually this owned media can transform into some exponential experiences. And I thought that was a really, really rich insight, particularly looking at where the market is today, but actually where it can be in the next sort of decade. So I thought that was a really, really cool thing. And that's something that's going to stay with me. I'd like just to turn to Richard Brown's question. So Richard is a through and through brand man. So his question is around, so what do you think you found hardest when talking about brands and creativity to those more left brain people that you now work with, let's say at Accenture, for example?
Well, I think it's, we talked about the value of creativity to business outcomes, and that is an ongoing debate. I think the challenge is, you know, great creative ideas often start a conversation that goes all the way through multiple channels, and you know, but they very rarely take the credit they deserve for the conversion. That would be my humble opinion. But I think within the organization, I think it's the time it takes to develop ideas is probably the hardest thing for left brain people to understand. So, you know, left brain people come from systemic thinking, and I've learned to hugely value and deeply understand and appreciate left brain thinking. Left brain thinking is about creating models of repetition, you know, where you can do something really, really well and then you can repeat that and scale it. You know, that is the language of the left brain. The language of the right brain is about sort of baking fresh ideas every day, and the fact that, you know, Mark's business needs a different idea from another financial or insurance business, and actually that is the way branding and creativity works. So I think probably very practically the struggle, if it's a struggle, the thing that I spend my time sort of constantly explaining to my left brain partners, and they really are brilliant partners, is, you know, we can't just pluck it down, we can't systematize it, we can't put it in a box. it would be wrong to repeat it. I mean, you want something should feel bespoke and ownable for the client. And I think that would be very practically the challenge, as beyond the efficacy of where creativity adds to the bottom line.
And just to follow up on the left brain, right brain thing, I'm an active campaigner around neurodiversity, which is often lost from the D&I conversation. So, and for people who are not so familiar, this buckets up dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, ADHD, and many of the greatest minds the world's ever known have had brains that are wired differently. And I just wanted to sort of, if that's a perspective that comes into the conversation in your travels within Accenture, is it a thing yet?
I think it's definitely a thing. I mean, I have a neurodiverse son who has nearly all of those conditions, and I've watched him blossom. And I am, like you, what I love about the way his brain works, just because I spend a lot of time with him, is if he can pick up on anything and can create a depth of knowledge that's almost unparalleled very, very quickly. And I believe that a lot of those people, brains and wiring, do end up on Microsoft campuses and do end up going into very left brain pursuits, because there's something about sort of solo deep work that kind of feels comfortable for people with some of those neurodiverse conditions we talked about. The point that I think is very interesting is how those people can play in the creative space. And I've got a friend of mine who has set up a very modern PR company, and she's recognized that to do deep specialist PR, you need that kind of plow-like mentality. And so she's setting up a team of neurodiverse sort of researchers and thinkers who can take that level of expertise to the next degree to provide better briefs for creativity. And I think that is equally interesting, because my slight worry is I look at my kid and I kind of go, can't see him on Microsoft campus, but I could see him in a gaming company, or whatever. And so I think the challenge for neurodiverse people is, one, they hugely got a role. They need different treatment, both in terms of interviewing and then recruitment and sustaining their well-being within the workplace. But, it would be a shame if we just pigeonholed them all into left brain pursuits. I do think they've got a lot more to offer. Again, I don't know whether that answers your question. But
yeah, I mean, I think it is the two extremes to the extreme. And then, of course, it's making the whole thing work. But I'm just remembering Kate Stanners, Global Creative Director at Saatchi, saying that she believed that more than half of her team were dyslexic in some way, shape, or form, because of those sort of the radical ideas, the freedom of thought. So I mean, I think it's, for me, I feel very positive that it is emerging as a conversation, and more people are getting better educated on the value that diversity brings.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
John, I'm going to ask perhaps a cliche but really practical question on the ground around creativity.
Sure.
People are always talking about this, and some people find that creativity is a rather nebulous concept, and we kind of all say we should be more creative. But actually, practically speaking, are there things that we could be doing in our organizations as individuals to harness creativity, to become more creative, to get those creative juices flowing? What would you?
Yeah, I think, oh, crikey, I mean, where to start? I mean, if you're talking about client organizations or just people generally, I think what doesn't happen enough is getting genuinely, it's an obvious thing to say, but into the shoes of the consumer. It doesn't happen enough. I speak to clients all the time that are obsessive about their internal structures and the way their products and services are organized, and they're geniuses on their own patch, but they don't spend enough time sort of literally jumping out of that and critiquing it from a consumer point of view. And even with all the data and research, they don't do that as a pursuit. So that would be one. Second thing is, I think, I work with a lot of people in the creative industries who aren't interested in broader creativity. And I think that's very stunting. So, when I was in New York, I was quite shocked at how sort of factory-like, in some cases, creativity can be. I used to desperately try and take our whole office to gigs and galleries and shows, because I'm a great believer in the adjacency of creativity. And where you what you see from art exhibition or a movie or a concert will inspire something in your brain to rewire it slightly. So that'd be a second observation. Third observation, I think, would be having more free-flowing creative sessions around the brand and the business, and potentially a loftier purpose without business imperatives. So I encourage all of our clients at least twice a year to luxuriate in a couple of days of complete free-flowing creative thinking around growth and the customer. And literally the only moral to the story, the only thing we pin in the middle is the purpose of the company. So all business objectives go away, and it's incredibly cathartic. And I, firsthand, I can tell you from CMOs who I work with, they say it's the biggest lifeblood and inspiration. It gives them ideas for years to come, but you have to unshackle it from the day to day. You have to make it relevant to your company and be, like that IKEA idea, it has to align with what your company stands for. But it's very refreshing sometimes to take the straitjacket off and to really, for clients to spend time with creative people, without the protection of account management and structures and tissue meetings, just to free flow it. So there'd be 3 suggestions, mate.
Well, John, you've already had Saffron come back and say that she loves the third idea around that. So perhaps she's going to preempt that at Santander. So
sure.
Thanks.
John, I can say I've never really been taken to gigs and stuff by any of my bosses, and it sounds like working for you would be a lot of fun. And maybe I've already answered the question, but if you could kind of clone yourself and work for yourself, you see what I mean? Yeah. You are your boss, not in the sense of I run my own business, but literally. What would be the best and worst things about working for you, if you take my meaning?
Yeah, I mean, well, I know the worst. I mean, definitely the worst is, I probably am neurodiverse, if I'm absolutely honest with myself. I mean, my brain sort of runs away with me, and I'm like down, I'm not particularly structured. So working for me at times is an absolute nightmare, particularly if you want, to have structured relationship and understand quite where the direction's going. And I also am hugely self-critical about the fact that I'm in one place and I kind of almost expect people to have got to the same place as me, and it's a great criticism in the way my brain works. I've also accepted that it can also be the good things, but that articulation between where I am and where I want my team to be is sometimes my flaw, and I can see it would be very frustrating for people. But I think on the positive, I think, people say, well, what's your best bit of advice or whatever, or what would be the way you work that people could model and learn from? I just think it goes back to what we said earlier, which is don't worry about new things, like dive head on into them and work them out. And I've done talks at schools, colleges, universities, and they say, what's your one bit of advice? And I always just say, just love the new stuff, particularly if you're going to go into creativity or marketing, because if you don't love the new stuff, there will be a point in your career where you get stuck, where you kind of realize your knowledge has plateaued, the world's changing around you, and you start to feel paranoid. And I think that's when the bad behaviors come in. And I see it a lot with my teams, with my clients. You just know that they're sort of stuck. And I think if you can open your mind where everything new and challenging motivates and drives you, and it's a mindset shift that I've got that I would love to share, you're going to keep going and keep growing and keep finding new exciting opportunities, I believe.
John, I'm really sad to say we're sort of out of time on this one, but I mean, what a journey. I mean, what an absolute incredible journey that you've had. I mean, entrepreneurial, corporate, but actually the strand that's sort of gone all the way through, is just this constant curiosity and constant desire to learn the new, experiment, be out there. And of course, we've touched on the role of creativity. And, there's no doubt in my mind now that you are, the title of King of Creativity is very well suited to you and what you've been able to achieve throughout your career. So look, on that note, and the audience, by the way, I can see it in the chat, absolutely loves you, absolutely loves your point of view and what you're bringing to the table. So it's with an absolute pleasure. And that I just want to say thank you from all of us for spending some time with us this morning. It's been so cool to have you on. And I genuinely have taken away so many key takeaways. That has been brilliant.
Thank you both for the great questions as well. Thank you, Mark and Richie. I appreciate everybody's time.
Yeah, so just to add my bit on top as well there, absolute pleasure and privilege to have you on, John. And that theme of exploration and possibility is really, really profound. Massively enjoyed your time having you on the show this morning. So thank you again. And just as a quick outro for next week, we've got Jeremy Waite, a fascinating guy, one of the most influential people in the world of marketing and technology, published author, blogger, climate reality leader. We'll find out more about what that entails. But I think ultimately the king of side hustles. So we'll find out about Jeremy's journey next week. So please tune in for the last show of the year. And thanks everybody who's been following through 2020, a fitting way to end the year. But for now, thanks again for dialing in. Thank you, John, and have great weekends, everybody.